Okay, let's talk a little bit about resonance, mediums, and the ear, and how all of that affects our perception of sound. So, how does this work? Well, let's dissect timbre. Every instrument works in the same way. They produce vibrations. A string moves back and forth when you pluck it or bow it. Reeds vibrate up and down to produce compression waves. Air goes into a flute, hits the edge, it creates compression. Lips buzz in a brass instrument to create compression waves, and hitting a percussion instrument definitely creates a wave. With the human voice, you have vocal cords and vocal folds that vibrate at different frequencies when the folds change their dimensions and affect that compression. You also have the embouchure that all of that is shaped in and that kind of adds to the resonance of the voice. All of this just creates the wave. It doesn't get to why each instrument sounds unique. That is timbre. Resonance is one of the major components of timbre. So once a wave is generated, it passes through the rest of the body of the instrument or the voice. This acts as a filter and attenuator, which helps to define the sound and its timbre. For example, in a string instrument, like a violin, you have the strings that are connected to the bridge, which transfers vibrations to the top of the violin. Then underneath the bridge, connecting into the top and the bottom of the body, you have the sound post. That vibrates, and inside the body cavity, the vibrations are filtered, attenuated, amplified, and output from the body of the violin. On a similar note, with drums, you have the shell. You hit the head of the drum, the vibrations transfer down into the shell where they resonate, and because it's a circular object, they're bouncing around like crazy, creating a really noisy signal. Then they come out from the body, or if it has a lack of a bottom on it, then it comes out of the bottom. With wind and brass mouthpieces, you create the buzzing in the mouthpiece, and the length of the pipe determines the pitch, but also determines the timbre. You'll get more definition with some lengths of pipe than you will with others. The shape and material also have a huge effect on the timbre. So everyone knows the standard acoustic guitar shape, but what if you made that a triangle? The classic flying V as an acoustic, if you will. Would that sound good? No. No, it wouldn't. It would sound terrible. You would have a totally different effect on the resonance of the instrument. You'd have some signals, some sound waves bouncing around at different points. It would sound bad. Similarly, plastic instruments. I know anyone who's taught in music ed has experienced plastic clarinets. They sound horrible, don't they? And plastic violins are even worse. So the material and the shape of the body have a huge impact on how we hear the sound coming through it. With the voice, you have a similar thing, the idea of formants. It's a combination of the vocal fold and the embouchure, which is the shape of the mouth and the tongue position that creates the vowel carriers that are actually sustaining pitch. For example, if I have a plosive consonant like p, 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 or b, or k, there's no actual sustain as opposed to a vowel like ah, eh, o, oo, e. Try and pronounce some of those vowels and think about the position of the tongue in your mouth and the shape of your mouth as well. You'll notice that they're all slightly different. Again, consonants are primarily controlled by the tongue position. When you're saying a really, really hard plosive consonant, where is your tongue hitting? Some of them will be closer to the roof of your mouth. Some will be closer to the bottom. Some parts, the tongue will expand out to the sides. Very interesting stuff. The internal resonance of the vocal folds and embouchure act together as a harmonic filter. They're getting rid of frequencies that are otherwise going to be present in what's produced from the vocal cords. and it emphasizes certain overtones or certain pitches within the pitch and vowel combination that might not otherwise be as prominent. And in fact, you can control these to produce vocal multiphonics. If you're not aware, Google throat singing. Take a look. It's pretty crazy, and hats off to anyone who has the time and inclination to learn how to do that. It's pretty cool. Also, you have electronic instruments now. By and large, electronic instruments have built-in filters, which we'll look at quite a bit when we start doing synthesis. But the filter does the same thing that the formants do in the voice, except without changing the embouchure. So it's going through and it's removing overtones, or it's removing fundamental frequencies and sweeping and expanding the overtones to change the sound. So keep in mind, with medium, this is also going to affect what we hear. The sound is transmitted through vibrations of one molecule transferring its energy to another, which causes the compression and rarefaction. And as we said last week, there's no reason why this has to occur solely within air. You have to do some sort of medium. You can't transfer sound throughout a vacuum, but other gases or configurations of gases will change the pitch. Everybody's heard someone inhale helium from a balloon and it raises the pitch, and you start talking like this. Oh, little munchkin voice. Whereas with nitrogen, it does the opposite. It changes the amount of molecules that are present in the vocal cords and the folds, and it drops your pitch considerably, and you get into that sub-bass territory. Obviously, I have to say this, but do not inhale pure helium or nitrogen. You can kill yourself doing that. Don't do it. In fact, any collection of molecules will work and will have an effect on what you hear. The same sound being propagated through a solid, liquid, or gas will sound dramatically different. In fact, the denser the material, the faster the sound travels, but that material will have more of a filtering effect on the sound and will change your perception of the pitch. So here's an example of how mediums for sounds create vibration. If you look at the solid, we've got a bunch of molecules all jammed together. You're going to have a really, really quick transmission of energy from one molecule to the next because they're so densely packed. In a liquid, you're going to have a very quick path as well, but it's not going to be as pronounced of a filtering effect as the solid. Then with a gas, like normal air, you're going to have much, much more space between the molecules, and so they're not going to transmit as much energy as quickly as they go through there. Very interesting. But eventually, those vibrations have to reach the ear. They travel through the medium, they hit the ear, and they eventually go into the brain. Specifically, there's parts of the ear that they will travel through, and let's take a look at those really quickly. You have the outer ear, which is comprised of the pinna, which is the fleshy bit on the outside of your head. This acts as a natural filter and helps you to localize sound. So because of the shape of the ear, it's slightly curving away from the back of your head and emphasizing things to the side and to the front. This has a really good effect on helping to define the stereo field, which we'll look at later. Inside that outer part, you have the ear canal. This is where you put Q-tips. This takes the incoming vibrations and directs them further inward. It also specifically attenuates frequencies between 2 and 5 kilohertz, which is why our hearing is really good at those ranges. We really hear sounds in that 2 to 5K range, specifically things like babies crying, sirens, animals screaming in pain, or, animal calls of some sort that primitive hunters would want to go and stab with rocks or spears. Once it gets through the ear canal, it goes to the middle part of the ear, where the sound hits the eardrum, also known as the tympanic membrane, because, drum, tympanic, hey. Yeah, that's a terrible pun. Anyway, sound hits it and it vibrates in sympathy to the sound waves that are hitting it, and it converts those vibrations to the ossicles, which are three little bones that are connected to the eardrum and act to mechanically amplify sound before passing them to the oval window of the cochlea and into the inner part of the ear. There are three bones called the malleus, the incus, and the stapes, or the hammer, anvil, and stirrup. Take a guess at what they look like. Once the vibrations hit the oval window, they pass into the cochlea, which is a fluid-filled coil, kind of like a snail shell or a nautilus shell. When the ossicles vibrate, it excites the fluid inside the cochlea. This is a closed system, so you're not getting in or out of it. But in that fluid are thousands of little hair cells that are connected to the nerve receptors. As vibrations hit those, they convert mechanical vibrations into electrical signals that the brain then decodes. Through the cochlea, you also have the basilar membrane. It's literally running through the center tube of the cochlea. This is really cool. Also in the ear, and we'll take a look at this in a second, you have what are called the Eustachian tubes. You've got one on the right ear, one on the left. These connect to the throat, and they regulate the pressure of the middle ear. These are the parts that are popping when you're on a plane or you have a severe pressure change and your ears pop. That's the Eustachian tubes. Now, how does the transmission from mechanical vibrations to electrical signals occur? There are two competing theories, and no one is 100% sure which one is right. So pick your theory and stake your place and defend it to the death. The theories are the temporal theory, which is that the frequency of a wave in the cochlea causes nerve fibers to fire at that frequency and translates the timing pattern to the brain. There's also place theory, which says that different positions of the basilar membrane respond to different frequencies. Again, no one's 100% sure. Some people think it's temporal, some people think it's place, some people think it's a hybrid. I'm not particularly going to take a place on this. So here we have a diagram of the ear. The outer ear, you can see the pinna and the ear canal. You can see how that goes to the eardrum, then to the ossicles, then it goes into the cochlea. Note the position of the Eustachian tube underneath kind of the middle ear and then going down into the skull just a little bit more. So how does this work? This is the idea of perception. Perception of sounds is extremely variable. There are some generalities, like we hear 22 hertz to 22,000 hertz, ideally in laboratory conditions. But as we age, humans lose the ability to hear higher frequencies. Right now, I can hear pretty much everything up to just a little bit above 16,000 hertz. Beyond that, it's all just kind of disappeared. But in addition to age, significant exposure to loud sounds will affect what you can hear, and it will start to create a dropout in higher frequencies as well. This is why earplugs are essential. If you don't have earplugs and you are listening to profound and prolonged exposure to loud sounds, you will start to degrade. The hair cells that are inside of your ear will die. And once they are dead, they are dead. You will never be able to hear those frequencies again. Any damage to the cochlea is irreversible. With that said, one thing that's very interesting is, especially with speech, the idea of consonant and what's happening with those. Vowels are what carry the pitch in human speech. But what about the consonants? Generally speaking, they're noise. They usually contain higher frequency bursts, or they can contain large aggregates or sounds. For example, the sibilants of S is that come across as noise signals. But they are a huge clue as to what syllable is being said. If I just strip out the consonant and say ah, you couldn't tell if I'm saying ba, da, fa, ta, sa, ga. It's all the same ah, but the consonant gives you that semantic clue. Psychoacoustics is the study of how this auditory system and the brain decodes the nerve impulses into sound data. This is very important to keep separate from music cognition, which is the mental process and mental representation of music that we do in the brain instinctively.